Hi, my name is Diane Charade Golas, and my group will be discussing about the analytic tradition. But first, I'm going to give you an overview of key ethical issues. The first key topic to be discussed in ethics is the theory of value. Value is sometimes defined as the object of human desire and striving. The technical name for a theory of value is axiology. For the classical Greek, the life lived according to reason is the value, or the end in view proper to human striving. The naturalist feels that the best possible fulfillment of the individual in society is attained through the techniques of the behavioral sciences. The Christian finds value in the good life leading to union with God. For the existentialist, value exists in the authenticity of an individual taking his life and his commitment seriously and with full responsibility. So, for example, when people or society see someone that follows God, they see that person with a value, or they can say that that person has a value or has values. So next is obligation. We all experience praise and blame in connection with the actions we perform. Obligation is the claim made upon us by reason that some things are to be done and deserve praise, whereas others are to be avoided and deserve blame. It is clearly related to the notions of responsibilities and freedom. We are responsible for actions when we are ready to account for them to ourselves or to others. Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher of the Enlightenment, stated that the experienced fact of duty or responsibility implies that we are free. In his words, I ought, therefore I can. The technical name for the part of ethics that deals with obligation is called deontology. Kant was a deontologist in that he placed the intuition of moral obligation at the very center of his ethics. So obligation is like, for example, in Filipino culture, when you are sent by your parents to school and you have lots of siblings, you are obliged or you feel obliged to send your siblings to school or to help them for them to finish schooling also. Next is natural law. Are all standards of right and wrong conditioned solely by the cultural norms by which one lives? Those who would reply affirmatively are cultural relativists who, like the naturalists, view the emergence of novel situations as a perpetual condition of an evolutionary universe and so cannot grant that any standard, based on an unchanging human nature, can be adequate. Those who oppose this view, including the Thomists and Aristotelians, call on a natural law theory that states that man himself is capable of setting up a standard of morality based on his own nature. Lastly, the virtue. A fourth and final key topic in moral theory concerns virtue, the power for moral action that enables man to act with ease and order in some area of his life. These excellences or good qualities have been given emphasis from classical times to today. The Greeks sought wisdom in philosophy and prudence and justice in politics. The existentialist stresses courage in face of responsibility. Next, we're going to talk about the analytic tradition, and my the first topic or my topic will analytic ethics. The fourth perspective describes an attitude toward moral theory that is prevalent today in the United States and Great Britain. The movement includes logical positivism and analytic philosophy, but the distinction between the two is tenuous. The analysts concentrate on the ex on on the examine I'm sorry. The analysts concentrate on the examination of language, whereas the earlier, hardcore positivists are more concerned with the model of the scientific method and the method of verification in the sciences. They have sought to impose this method of verification in philosophy. However, Both the analysts and the logical positivists are interested in analysis of language as well as in scientific method as a model for philosophy. So, um, next is the analytic movement. The analytic movement is in many ways a continuation of the analytic spirit of David Hume, whose clarity of style and logical rigor are considered exemplary by contemporary analysts. The movement really began with the reaction of G. E. Moore and Bertrand Russell against the Hegelian idealism current in Great Britain at the turn of the century. Instead of accepting the Hegelian notion of reality as a unity and manifestation of absolute spirit, they considered reality as consisting of discrete phenomena and events, each of which must be examined and named. To adopt a metaphor of Russell's, one could say that whereas the universe of Hegel is like a handful of jello that quivers when touched at any spot, the universe of the positive sciences is like a handful of pellets, each of which is distinct from every other. Philosophic language is seen to be an accurate logic whose function is to describe these atomic facts that are the substance of all that is real. Russell and Whitehead undertook to provide such a logic in their famous Principia Mathematica. So, in simpler terms, um, it means using common experience and ordinary language to analyze concepts and language in philosophy. So, say for example, linguistic analysis. Linguistic analysis studies the way words are used. So, it also holds that philosophy should apply logical techniques in order to attain conceptual clarity, and that philosophy should be consistent with the success of modern science. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andre Flores, and the continuation of analytic tradition as a result of these researches, British philosophers became more and more interested in the possibility that language could sometimes be very deceptive and create false issues and problems. This explains that language could create false issues and problems because we have a different language that will lead us into misunderstanding. Like I speak Cebuano, then I communicate with a Tagalog person. That person will never understand me at all, so he may think nga gabugal-bugal ko niya, labi na sa tono na to mga Bisaya nga isog. Cebuano is known for strong voices, like pirmi lang nasuko ko no. So, a brilliant attempt to state the limits of language with the utmost clarity and completeness was made by Ludwig Ludwig Wittgenstein, 1889 to 1951, in his book Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, 1921. Inside his book, Logical Construction of Philosophical System has purpose to find the limit of the world, thought, and language. In other words, to distinguish between sense and nonsense. In his book, there are 7 ways to distinguish between sense and nonsense. For example, Wittgenstein says in his book, chapter 1.1, the world is totally of facts, not things. He meant that he's not denying that there are things in addition to facts. Another example is that the world is all that is that case. Wittgenstein is merely defining the context of his argument. In this case, to inform his audience, the world is the current case under the discussion, and that in this case he is writing about the world. Alfred Jules Friede Ayer, or A.J. Ayer, and his book Language, Truth and Logic, 1936. About that time, A.J. was convinced that standard philosophical subjects such as metaphysics are really an abuse of language and ultimately composed of nonsense statements. So he came to this conclusion because he couldn't find none way of testing the truth of falsity of many of the statements of the idealistic metaphysics. And so, in his book Language, Truth, and Logic 1936, we found his reasons why he rejected idealistic metaphysics. And it is because in his book there is a famous verification principle that he asserted that before a statement could be considered meaningful, there must be a criterion to test in its truth or lack of truth. Because in idealistic metaphysics view, it associates reality to the ideas in the mind rather than the material objects. So ang idealistic nag-focus sa mind while the analytic analytic the analytic nag-focus siya sa material object, and it emphasizes mental or spiritual components of experience and re-announce the notion of material existence. And that's why wala ni agree si Ayer sa idealistic metaphysics view. So, the distinctive of analytic philosophy is its insistence that the moral philosopher be constrained to the use of language that has control of its term and to the use of claims that can be warranted true or false, valid or invalid. In analytic philosophy, they believe that each person has a character nga lahi sa ubang tao nga gipugnan to the use of language that will control kung unsay purpose o unsay dapat nimo i-claim, whether it is warranted truth or false or invalid. Just like giingon ni Ayer nga before a statement could be considered meaningful, there must be a criterion to test its truth. So, mangita gid siya og criteria para ma 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 sani judge nimo ang usa ka statement whether it is true or false. And I think that is the end of my topic.
Hi, good day everyone. I'm Maria Fehernida and I'll be talking about perspectives of key issues. So to start, perspectives of key issues. Since the analytic philosophers are not primarily concerned with realities of value, obligation, law, and virtue, it will be necessary to describe the main notions in their ethical theory. The first of these is what G.E. Moore called the naturalistic fallacy. We commit this fallacy when we derive ethical conclusions from premises that are not ethical, or when we attempt to describe either notions with terms that are not ethical. The majority of morality, according to Moore, make their initial mistake in categorizing the good by reducing it to something else, such as pleasure or utility. Moore was convinced that the good need not be reduced to some other value because it is itself concretely involved in our experience. Moore stated that we cannot move from fact to values. He said that moral truth cannot be defined by looking at the natural world. Similarly to Hume, he stated that you cannot draw an ought from an is. Example is the fact is orange have vitamins, and the value is that it is good to eat orange. Having the same immediacy as any other quality, what is striking about his view in his claim that the yellow in the tulip and the good of the good deeds share the same level of concrete immediacy to the knower. More further elaborate of this claim is included in the selection from Principal Ethica 1903. That's all with my report, sir. And next is John Paul.
Good day, everyone. Emotive language. A second major theme of analytic is the suggestion of E.G. Ayer that ethical language must be sharply distinguished from the use of language in the sciences, whereas scientific language can be verified concretely and rendered meaningful, ethical is emotive. In other words, any ethical statement merely reflects a personal emotional feeling or attitude that has little more significance than an ejaculation, such ouch or oh. For ire, value cannot exist since they are outside the domain or scientific verification and accordingly meaningless. Ayer's own statement of his emotive theory is found in his selection from language through any logic in this volume. Emotive language refers to the word choices that are intended to get an emotional reaction or arouse an emotion. It doesn't matter what it is: anxiety, anger, relief, urgency, joy, excitement, and so on, as long as it has been evoked from the language used. For example, an innocent bystander was murdered in cold blood in downtown Chicago. The words innocent and murdered and the phrase in cold blood are uses of emotive language in the sentence. Emotive language is one of the most powerful strategies used to elicit a value judgment on a situation.
The role of persuasion. Aristotle determined that persuasion comprises a combination of three appeals, which is the logos, pathos, and ethos. Anyone seeking to persuade an audience should craft his or her message with facts, or what we call logos, tapping an argument's emotional aspect or pathos, and presenting his or her apparent moral standing or ethos. So Charles L. Stevenson, B. 1908. Charles Stevenson, he was an American philosopher best known for his pioneering work in field of metaethics. He also agrees with Ayer that ethical statements are not scientific and accordingly cannot be verified in any public manner. Stevenson's major contribution to philosophy was his development of emotivism, or theory of ethical language according to which moral judgments do not state any sort of fact, but rather express the moral emotions of the speaker and attempt to influence others. Moral conflict. This is especially true because the belief that is one component of the ethical command can be subjected to change or confirmation by persuasion. When we say moral conflict, when one person uses a moral to persuade that another either does not follow or has an opposing moral, then conflict may well ensue. Let's proceed to the next, which is the approach of ordinary language. The approach of ordinary language. A philosophical methodology that sees traditional philosophical problems as rooted in misunderstandings philosophers develop by distorting or forgetting how words are ordinarily used to convey meaning in non-philosophical contexts. P.H. Noel Smith or Patrick Howard Noel Smith, B. 1914. He represents the ordinary language approach to philosophy. The ordinary language philosopher retains the desire to analyze philosophical notions with great care, but his special characteristic is that examines the use of a term in a concrete context. So P.H. Noel Smith, the first example of moral philosopher, Patrick Noel Smith's wit and wisdom comes from the work Ethics, by which he will be remembered. The paradox elegantly makes an important point about evaluative concepts. So the last topic I'm going to tackle is the existentialist and post-existentialist tradition. When we say existentialist tradition, it is the existence is always my existence, your existence, his existence, her existence, and everyone's existence. Existence is primarily used the problem of existence. It is therefore also the investigation of the meaning of being. Among them is the great emphasis that the existentialist place on the meaning of man's personal freedom. Man is decisive in his own life. He makes his life what it is by his own free decision. The authentic man must commit himself. He cannot give his power of choice away throughout in some way dehumanizing himself and becoming fraudulent or subhuman. So, the existentialist and post existentialist tradition, the theories of existentialists and post existentialists seem like very different ideas of first glance. Existentialist is a philosophy of individuals, while post existentialist is a theory focused more on society and less on individual existence. So that would be all for our report. Thank you and God bless.